Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin held a meeting in Geneva to talk about sensitive topics such as US concerns on Russian presence on the Ukrainian border, the imprisonment of Kremlin opponent Alexei Navalny, and Putin's support for Belarusian strongman Alexander Lukashenko. So with all this tension between them, what did their body language say? Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and if you want to join us unlocking the secrets of human behavior, all you have to do is subscribe and hit that bell. Let's get down to it. The first impression that we had about their meeting was their posture standing outside the venue. Both of them were standing straight. Putin had his shoulders back and his hands to his sides. That's a neutral posture that works very well for these occasions. Notice that his hands are turned backwards, which signal a reserved personality that goes hand in hand with his usually limited facial expressions. Biden, on the other hand, opted for having his hands locked over his belly. Maybe his position is a bit more comfortable, but in this case, he's showing a first impression of protecting himself. He's crossing his hands over a vulnerable area of his body. Again, it's not like he's going to be attacked or something, but that's the first impression he's giving, even if he has the advantage of being taller than his Russian counterpart. I usually pay attention to the feet, and in this case, Biden has his feet a little closer than Putin's. Keep in mind that having your feet slightly separated helps with your own confidence and the confidence you project to the public. The American was much more expressive afterwards, but at that moment he had his lips strongly pressed, while Putin had a neutral or serious expression. At that exact moment, Biden looks a bit uncomfortable thanks to all the signals so far. Another characteristic of Putin is that he was restless from the start. You can clearly spot his fingers fiddling a lot and even some pacifying gestures. I usually recommend that you don't show this kind of signals because restlessness almost always looks like being nervous, and unless you make it absolutely clear that you're a bit anxious instead of nervous, people watching you could get the wrong message. Immediately after that first introduction to the meeting, they went for the handshake. Let's see what your intuition can make of it. Before I explain their handshake, it's important to know something about this kind of events. The meeting of two powerful figures is always interesting because they are sending signals to each other and to their respective countries. In fact, any encounter between two leaders is going to be divided into three levels. The first level is the one common to any of us, the personal one. It's how each one feels internally about the encounter. Such as when you meet someone that makes you feel uncomfortable, your body language shows it, and you have a feedback loop to your own emotions. That feedback loop is kind of a fail-safe system to reassure your own feelings, so that's why it's so important to consciously adopt postures of confidence at all times so that it reinforces your inner state in a positive way. The second level is the actual interaction between both persons, how they perceive each other. Body language is a deep channel of communication and the first and most important impression at all times, so it's critical that it is aligned with the message you want to project to your counterpart, no matter if you consider them an ally or an opponent. Whether if you're willing to negotiate or have a more adamant stance, your body language is the way to send that signal about your intentions. If, for example, someone says that they are absolutely sure about a fact and they show nervousness with their body, that contradiction could be seen as weakness. The third and maybe the most important level in these situations is the way your tribe, your group, or your country perceives you as their leader. This is beyond what you feel about the encounter or how your opponent perceives you. Again, if you choose to present yourself as an empathetic leader, then your body language should project that. But if you saw yourself as a strong man and all of a sudden you look weak, and you will lose credibility with the ones you lead. The weight of all three states is not the same, and in any encounter of leaders, the highest weight is going to be the third state, how your country or your tribe perceives you. This is absolutely critical because they are trusting your leadership and trusting that you're the right one for the job. And that's why sometimes it makes sense for some leaders in politics to choose with whom should they look friendly and with whom should they look a bit cold or even rude. Remember that you represent the interests of your tribe, and if you meet someone that goes against those interests, you can't act like they are your friend because you will be perceived as a traitor to your own cause. Now, the handshake. The instant before locking hands, you can see that distinction in the way both of them project their personality and leading style in just seconds. Biden is the first one to turn. He even leans a bit, like signaling for the handshake. Putin doesn't react until a couple seconds later. The fact that Biden extended his hand first and stood his ground without moving much is a good strategy because he's forcing the Russian to walk towards him. That is also a nonverbal message of power. You force the other to walk to you and not the other way around. That tactic also forces the other to see where your hand is, and for that they have to lower their gaze. That's how you get an instant shot like this one, where Putin is looking down while Biden is looking straight at him. That's another sign of power. You make the other person look down. Speaking of the handshake itself, Putin gave a power hand with the palm a bit downwards, and Biden offered his in a more neutral angle. When they locked hands, Biden's posture was a bit hunched, again due to the difference in height. But it doesn't matter if Putin is shorter, Biden could just keep his posture and look more confident at that moment. Remember that no matter how tall you are, you must keep the right posture at all times with your shoulders back. You can nod or use your head to greet and acknowledge the other person, but keep a correct posture at all times. One interesting observation is that when Putin was greeted by Switzerland's President Guy Parmelin, he showed a more powerful stance since his feet were a bit more apart. Notice in this close-up the pressure between their fingers. The way there are wide areas in Biden's fingers is a signal of that pressure, and the difference in size between both of them is an advantage for the American too. Their facial expressions also differ. We're accustomed to Putin never smiling broadly. It's extremely uncommon to see him showing his teeth, and his close smile is almost a staple of his personality and political image. Biden, on the other hand, was not afraid to smile broadly and even raise his eyebrows a lot, which was trying to project a really empathetic approach to the gesture. This is what I mean when I talk about the projection of each leadership style. You've got many angles to this, but let's say we simplify it over a line that goes from power stance to empathetic vibes. That's the easiest contrast in leadership image. You can either project power or be empathetic, but not the two at the same time. If Putin opts for the power stance and Biden for the empathetic spectrum, each one has to show coherence with their own leadership style. Right before going in, Putin makes sure to watch up front to the photographers. You might think that he wanted to strike a pose so he'll look great on the final pic, but it's also strategy. If they shoot a photo at that moment, they're going to see Biden looking at Putin, but Putin looking away and to the camera. It will look like Biden is way more interested in being there or even admiring the Russian. Most of the time, people in general are going to see just an image or a very short clip of this kind of encounters, and even a single image can have a huge impact on public opinion when combined with the right headline. People are not going to read the article. They will look at the picture, read the headline, and retweet. Jump to conclusions. That's why these tactics are so important. And sometimes one image is all you need. We have clips of the moment where Biden, Putin, Sergei Lavrov, and Anthony Blinken were sitting so that the press could take photos of them, and it was a bit messy. I guess due to the fact that the number of people at the back of that room trying to get a picture. Even with that competition, it was possible to catch this image that shows enough information to make a body language analysis. Let's go one by one, starting with Biden. He's sitting with his legs crossed at the knees in what we call an European leg cross. The other option called the American leg cross, when one ankle rests over the other leg. He was not smiling all the time, but when he did, he tried his best to show a full smile like in this picture. Also, the interlocked fingers over the thigh are a gesture of being calm and collected. This is a very common posture and very comfortable too. I remember that Obama used to sit a lot like this, leg crossed at the knees, face relaxed or smiling a bit, and hands with fingers crossed over the thigh. You use neutral postures when you want to remain open what may happen or which topics could arise. In Putin's case, he opted for a different approach. He's not crossing his legs, his feet are planted on the ground and his arms are flat on the armrests. There's nothing that signals a defensive posture. Both his legs are not crossed and his hands are not together. You might think that since this looks like a more open posture, then it must mean that Putin is more open to talk, alright? But in fact, it's not an open posture, but more one of the defiance. His chest, his belly, his groin are on display, so it's a way of signaling that he's not afraid of any attack. And of course, he also has that unimpressed stare that, when combined with his back fully resting on the chair, projects an image of not caring much about the meeting. In contrast, you remember this picture when Obama met with him a few years back. Notice that Putin is in exactly the same posture, like I'm going to make myself comfortable here, and spot that Obama was not crossing his legs at that moment, but instead opted to plant his feet on the ground too. And yes, there's yet another meeting of them where Putin has a very similar posture and Obama still did not cross his legs. And this is worth repeating, that the posture with both feet on the ground, or at least not crossing your legs, is more powerful or defiant than crossing them. Crossing the legs in any version is a defensive gesture, and if you show defensiveness, then you are implying that you're afraid of an attack. But Putin and Obama had other moments when the Russian looked much more engaged, and that's when he leans a bit forward. We lean forward when we are more interested in the conversation or the topic sparks our interest momentarily. Of course, there were also interactions with Donald Trump, and in this you can see Putin much more engaged and interested in the exchange. By the way, I'm planning to do a complete Donald Trump body language analysis. If you'd like to see it, all you have to do is like this video and comment what I should not miss. I should also mention the way that their sidekicks were sitting. Lavrov had a posture very similar to Putin's, with both feet planted on the ground. And even if Blinken was not crossing his legs, he had his ankles very close and under his chair. This is not quite a defensive stance, but he doesn't look much confident either. And this is one of the recommendations that I give when I coach in negotiation groups, or even if you're giving a group presentation. Every member of your team should be perceived as in perfect unison with the rest. That way, the team is perceived as a solid unit that even if one of them fumble or make a mistake, it will have less of an impact on the global perceived image. That's a psychological tactic that usually instills insecurity in any opposing team. You watch a group or a team where every single member is perfectly fitting in their role, or they have a similar attitude, that will give you the sensation that they are better prepared than you. They had moments of fake emotions too, like this one. First, their posture is another signal of their tense relationship. Biden, in this case, is standing straight while Putin was leaning a bit away from him. We know that when two persons are in sync with each other, they are going to mirror each other's movements. So in this case, either Putin should have been standing straight, or even Biden could have been leaning away from the Russian. Even if it's a picture and not a video, it's useful to remember these clues so you can apply them in your daily observations. Like spotting the way each one keeps their hands. Putin has them clenched in a fist in a defensive and reserved posture, while Biden keeps them open but tense at the same time. It's fascinating how they are really trying to look happy to share the moment, but both their posture and body language clues give away their real emotional state. We are much more used to lying with our faces, so I usually leave that for last. Not because the face is not important, because it is, but because we don't usually lie with our bodies or don't have the experience to do it at the right time. In this case, I would say that Biden's smile is genuine, as you can spot all the factors of a real smile. The pulled up lip corners, the raised cheeks, and the compressed corners of his eyes. You may think that Putin's also showing a genuine smile, but in this case, the lip corners are not going up, but instead they're being pulled to the sides. And even if his cheeks are tense, they're not exerting pressure on his eyes. Those wrinkles are his regular eye wrinkles. And we know, thanks to prior footage, that even if Putin is not very expressive with his face, he's able to show full smiles on command whenever he wants, either fake or genuine. And that brings a very important and logical question. If Putin was trained in the KGB, he learned so much about human behavior and of course learned to fake all kinds of emotions, then what is the purpose of showing this non-emotion in particular? What is the purpose of looking not interested? As in every body language analysis, we should consider various scenarios. For example, either Putin has real emotions or he is controlling them and we are watching only what he wants us to see. It makes sense that the Russian president, in his first encounter with the new American president and in the middle of such tense relations, would not let any real emotions or expressions show. You could perfectly assume that what he's showing is absolutely on purpose. But again, if it's on purpose, then what are the intentions behind showing that disinterest? And as you can see, a body language analysis is way beyond observing body language signals. It's paramount that you ask yourself questions about what you're perceiving, especially because your judgment or prejudices or biases can get in the way of what you're watching. So going back to the message that Putin is trying to send in a subconscious level is that he really doesn't respect much Biden's image and power. And it makes sense because that is what created the tense relations in the first place. That Putin doesn't feel compelled at all to respect America's opinion or stance on Russian affairs. You have asked me many times in the comments, what happens when there are no contradictions in body language? How do we spot them? And this is an excellent example of that. Putin is faking emotions, or at least controlling them from A to Z, so they convey his posture about Biden and his country. So in essence, he's using his body language to embody the Russian politics on America and the world. And I've mentioned this for situations when you have an important presentation or exposition, whether at work or at college. People say, I just want to be myself, and they use it as an excuse to not be aware of the body language. And this is a huge mistake. Because in those situations, the most important thing is not you, but your message. You're just a messenger. Your body language, the way you dress, the words you use are a vessel for the message, not for your personality. And it makes sense that if you prepare a speech with the right words and try to look sharp and tidy and have the right kind of clothing for the occasion, then your body language should also be aligned with the message that you want to convey. Some say that analyzing politicians is fruitless because they are always lying or pretending, and maybe they're right to some extent. But the right angle to that is that politicians are always trying to send a message, trying to connect with the electorate or their country or with anyone they want to connect with. That's why they apply these tactics to show some intentions and hide others. Again, maybe you're not going to use them to lie to a crowd, but it's the same principle when you want your message to take center stage. Of course, sometimes body language clues are so evident that it's very hard to believe that they were not on purpose. There's one press conference some days prior where Putin was talking about the very bad state of Russian and American relations. And he was answering a question specifically about Biden.
Вы будете с американским президентом обсуждать?
Мы будем обсуждать вопросы двусторонних отношений. Я исхожу из того, что мы должны попытаться найти пути урегулирования этих отношений. Сегодня они находятся на чрезвычайно низком уровне, мы это все хорошо знаем.
Right when he says, I think we should try to find a way to resolve these relations, he does this gesture with his left hand, scratching his eye with his middle finger. It's something that cannot be unseen and too much of a coincidence that he does this gesture once, specifically when talking about America and exactly when asked about Biden. It's a not so subtle way of giving him the finger, and since we pay so much more conscious attention to words, and he did not stop talking, then it's highly likely that it's going to pass undetected. Again, it's both a message for the Russian people and also the American people, but with a twist. Most Americans that watch this press conference are going to read the subtitles because they don't know Russian, and Putin knows that. So he knows that it's even more likely that this subtle gesture is going to pass undetected, consciously by American eyes. That's what I mean when I talk about the level of training that Putin has in psychological warfare, neuro-linguistic programming, and how can he use both his words and body language to send an encoded message. And now that we're talking about their public appearances in the days prior to this summit, while I was researching clips for this analysis, I stumbled upon Biden answering this question about Putin. I'd like to make a test and ask you to use your intuition. Watch the following clip. It's around 2 minutes long, and let your intuition tell you what can you make of Biden's attitude. Here's the clip.
Weekend interview, Vladimir Putin laughed at the suggestion that you had called him a killer. Is that still your belief, sir, that he is a killer? And I'll continue the trend if you don't mind of asking a second question. Do you believe if he does agree to cooperate, then what kind of a challenge do you find yourself in? How would you ever trust him? And if Ronald Reagan said trust but verify, what do you say to Vladimir Putin?
To answer the first question, I'm laughing too. Well, look, I mean, he has made clear that the answer is, I believe he has in the past essentially acknowledged that he was, there are certain things that he would do or did do. But look, when I was asked that question on air, I answered it honestly. But it's not much of a, I don't think it matters a whole lot in terms of this next meeting we're about to have. The second question was, I'd verify first and then trust. In other words, everything would have to be shown to be actually occurring. It's not about, trusting. It's about agreeing. You know, when you write treaties with your adversaries, you don't say, I trust you. You say, this is what I expect. And if you violate the agreement you made, then quote, the treaty's off, the agreement's off. And I'm hoping that that President Putin concludes that there is some interest in terms of his own interests in changing the perception that the world has of him in terms of whether or not he will engage in behavior that's more consistent with what is considered to be appropriate behavior for head of state.
With so many hours of experience that any politician has in the art of public speaking, it's not very common that we get to see one answer in this way, especially if it's a hot and incoming topic. What did your intuition tell you? I'd love to read it in the comments. Of course, after their talks, they gave short speeches and answered a few questions about what's the current state of the relations between both countries and what can we expect in the following months. And at this point, it's imperative to make a distinction in the location of each press conference. Putin was granted an indoor climate-controlled room, while Biden had to do it outside, and you know how hot can it get in these months in Europe. That's why Biden at some point had to take his jacket off. Totally understandable. But again, someone could grab a picture of Putin and one of Biden without jacket, and the Russian will end up looking more confident and powerful just for having the full suit. Of course, you could be asking, do leaders and especially world leaders have to look powerful all the time? And no, that's impossible. You can look powerful or confident all the time. But in these situations, people will invariably compare every attitude of both Biden and Putin, even if in a subconscious way. Like if you're watching a football match and you're rooting for your team, you want your team to dominate the field. In this case, you want your president to dominate the encounter, and yes, it's really important that they look confident, powerful, and capable of making tough decisions. Remember that they represent the interests of their country, so there's not much leeway for mistakes. Mistakes like Biden saying that he's going to answer questions, but that he has a list of the press reporters that he's going to choose for that matter.
I'll take your questions, and as usual, folks, they gave me a list of the people I'm going to call on.
That's a mistake. Because as I said earlier, the US and Russia relations are not on the best moment. Putin is covertly mocking Biden, and in one way or another, Biden needs to show a strong stance to counter what Russia has been doing all along. I absolutely understand that every president needs help with everything they do every day. And of course, Biden's advisors would have warned him about some members of the press that will be a bit rougher than others. That's understandable. That's common sense. You don't have to say that you have a list of the people that you're going to call. Let me try to get my point across. When a president gives a speech, for example, that speech almost always is written by a specialist at that task. And almost everyone knows it. But the fact that they give the speech and as if it were theirs, it adds to the image and trust that a country feels about the decisions of their leader. Imagine if someone is going to give an inspirational speech and before starting they say, "Now I'm going to give my speech, but just so you know, someone else wrote it for me and I'm going to read it in the teleprompter because there is no way that I was going to remember all this." This hypothetical president would not be lying. Someone else wrote the speech for him. That's fine with me. He will be using the teleprompter. Go ahead. But I mentioned how important is the message and how sometimes our personality or body language or words get in the way of the message that we're trying to convey. Biden has assistants that warn him about mean reporters. Alright, shocking news. But saying publicly that they gave him a list of people to call on is a stain on the image and the message that he's trying to get across. In this particular situation, it was of utmost importance that he looked decisive. So that sentence does not go with that intention. In the body language realm, every person has their unique signature, and in this case, Putin's gestures are much more dynamic. He has a constant speech pattern, he emphasizes with his head, he uses his hands with illustrator gestures to get people's attention. In that sense, he reminds me a lot of Obama, who really knew how to use his body to create an engaging atmosphere. But sadly, that's not the case with Biden. His hand gestures and general demeanor are much slower. His speech pattern is a bit erratic. He almost never does hand gestures wider than shoulder width. His chin is a bit low, and that gives the impression that he's weary or tired. The only moment that he reacted with a truly strong gesture is right at the end when he reacted to a nod from a reporter, and his speech was suddenly stronger and he raised his index finger up front in a very strong manner. I think that's the attitude he should have had through all the press conference. So it's not only a matter that Americans are looking at Biden speaking like this, but worse yet is that he spoke after Putin, so you know that everyone was going to compare both attitudes and his attitude was going to come off as even more weary and tired. And that's not a good way to stand for your country and its interests. I think the meeting between Biden and Putin was an excellent opportunity to compare the body language signals of two presidents whose countries' relations have reached a low point. It's not the same when everything is going well, because that tension is what makes the encounter relevant. As in, we want to know what this is about. We want our president to be as strong and to look as strong as the people of our country. Again, every single politician has their own unique style. Whether it's Angela Merkel or Justin Trudeau or López Obrador, or of course there are going to be differences between each leadership style. And it shows in the way the public perceives them. And it's in that perception that you inspire trust in your citizens. Countries go through good times and bad times, and the last year has not been a walk in the park for any country. As president, you have to make all the tough decisions and at the same time make your country feel that whatever happens, they're going to be alright. And it helps a lot if you think in terms of not only what you say, but how you say it. One more thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, to state the obvious, and I'm not trying to be a wise guy here, I really mean it. That's not Donald Trump's story. Just listen to me a second without booing or cheering. I mean this sincerely. We should really think about this. His cynicism is unbounded. His lack of empathy and compassion can be summed up in a phrase I suspect he's most proud of having made famous: "You're fired." I mean, really, I'm not joking. Think about that. Think about that. Think about everything you learned as a child, no matter where you were raised. How can there be pleasure in saying you're fired? He's trying to tell us he cares about the middle class. Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
I've got other videos about body language so you can level up your own skills and have fun at the same time. And if you want to know as soon as my new episodes come out, all you have to do is subscribe and hit that bell. Take care, my body language buddies.